Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to welcome you to the ASEAN Hall for the briefing on the outcomes of the 48th ASEAN Summit and related meetings, which will be delivered by His Excellency Dr. Kau Kim Hourn, Secretary General of ASEAN. For this occasion, we are not only joined by the Diplomatic Corps in Jakarta, but also by ASEAN entities and centers, partners project management team, media in Jakarta, as well as representative from the ASEAN Committee in Third Countries and International Organization, ACTCs, who are attending this briefing virtually. This briefing is also live streamed to the ASEAN Secretariat YouTube channel. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, we would like to kindly invite His Excellency Dr. Kau Kim Hourn, Secretary General of ASEAN, to deliver the briefing. SG Dr. Kau, the floor is yours, please.
Good morning, Excellencies, permanent representatives to ASEAN, and of course, all the heads of the permanent missions. Our member states to ASEAN, Excellencies, ambassadors of dialogue partners, sectoral dialogue partners, different partners, Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends, colleagues, especially those who are joining us virtually, including the ASEAN committees in third countries and international organizations. Also, I want to extend a warm welcome to all friends and colleagues from the media. I'm pleased to brief you on the key outcomes of the 48th ASEAN Summit and related meetings. The theme for this year, meaning for the 48th ASEAN Summit, is navigating our future together. His Excellency President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. chair the ASEAN Summit, the plenary session, as well as the retreat, and of course the Bimanga Summit, which is a sub-regional summit. I want to highlight the important points that was underscored by His Excellency the President, and that is navigating a future, which is to ensure that future shocks will not become crises. I think that's one of the key points that he highlighted during this year 48th ASEAN Summit. The 48th ASEAN Summit was held in Cebu, the Philippines on May 8, just Friday last week. I wish to start by taking this opportunity to congratulate and express my appreciation to President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as the President of the Republic of the Philippines, of course also as ASEAN Chair for this year, for his able and effective chairmanship of the 48th ASEAN Summit. And we'll come to the reason why this year summit, particularly the retreat, is a little bit different from all the retreats, because I have been attending the ASEAN Summit related summit since 2001. With the exception I missed only in 2019, but the rest I attended all the meetings, so I could observe and I will share with you. Take this opportunity, of course, I also want to express my congratulations to the 3 chairs of the ASEAN Community Councils, because before the summit, as a matter of practice for ASEAN, that the chairs of the 3 community councils will be chaired by the leading ministers from the ASEAN chair. So we have Her Excellency Ma Teresa Lazaro, Secretary of Foreign Affairs, and of course, as the chair of the AMM, she was able to chair the ASEAN Forum meeting, the ASEAN Political Security Community Council, and the ASEAN Coordinating Council. And Her Excellency Ma Christina Oroki, Secretary of the Department of Trade and Industry, who chaired the ASEAN Economic Community Council. And His Excellency Rex Gatchalian, Secretary of Social Affairs and Development, who was the chair of the ASEAN Social Cultural Community Council. Both the Foreign Minister of the Philippines and the Economic Minister of the Philippines co-chair the joint ASEAN Economic and Foreign Ministers meeting. And this is very important because this is the second time that we have this meeting, the joint Economic and Foreign Ministers meeting. The last time we had was in October last year, just right before the summit of the 47th ASEAN Summit. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I want to share with you there was 18 key outcome documents that were adopted and noted by the ASEAN leaders during the 40th ASEAN Summit. And some of these documents I will be elaborating later on. The 40th ASEAN Summit provided an excellent opportunity for many bilateral meetings between ASEAN leaders and ministers, including the president of the Asian Development Bank, who was invited as a guest chair as well. The president of the ADB, who briefed the ASEAN leaders during the ASEAN Summit plenary session, was about how ADB is ready to work closely with ASEAN, specifically in its initiatives on connectivity, energy security, food security, AI readiness, blue economy, and of course other areas. Particularly, those are resulting from the current or being impacted by the current situation in the Malays. This year, as I've been informed, that we had about 900 media outlets registered to cover the entire 48th ASEAN Summit. So there was a lot of media coverage from the various meetings, including the main meeting, which is the 48th ASEAN Summit. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, as President Marcos Jr., as Chair of ASEAN, emphasized, there is an urgent need for ASEAN leaders to meet in order to address the profound global uncertainties, or regional geopolitical tensions, and certainly the economic volatilities. It is in this context that ASEAN leaders focus their main discussions during the summit session on the three main priorities. First, on ensuring regional energy security and resilience. Second, on stabilizing food security. And third, on the safety of the ASEAN nationals. On ensuring regional energy security and resilience, the ASEAN leaders stressed the need for stable energy supply chains, stronger energy interconnectedness, and accelerated diversification toward renewable energy. They spoke about the utility of having an appropriate energy mix, as this would help prevent over-reliance on any source of energy, and thus making us less vulnerable to external shocks. The leaders, of course, also agree on the urgent need to have the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Petroleum Security, or APSA, being ratified as quickly as possible, and stress the need to ensure the operationalization of the ASEAN power grid to support cross-border electricity trade and ensure access to affordable energy. I would like to highlight that there is some discussion on an energy stockpile in ASEAN. And this certainly has gained a lot of attention and priority among the ASEAN leaders. On stabilizing food security, ASEAN leaders agreed to maintain open and predictable markets, strengthen intra-ASEAN trade and supply chain connectivity, maintain regional seamless flow of essential commodities, therefore reinforcing food and energy security amidst rising costs and supply disruptions. The leaders call for the swift ratification of the Protocol 2.0 upgrade of the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement, or ATIGA, within this year. So I think there is, when it was signed in October last year, it would take roughly about 18 months. But now there's a call for early ratification, which is swift ratification of this ATIGA. I also want to share that a number of ASEAN leaders refer to the utility of having effective monitoring system with regard to the food reserves across the ASEAN member states. This is very important because we want to make sure that our region has food security. Of course, also this is meaning it would include leveraging on the current ASEAN +3 emergency rice reserve that we have at the moment as the key mechanism there, and the ASEAN Food Security Information System. So the idea is that how to make the existing tools that we have more effective and to respond to the rising needs. On the micro, small, and medium enterprises, which was one of the key issues, is because the impact of the crisis in the Middle East has a lot of impact on MSMEs. The ASEAN leaders underscore the utmost importance to support MSMEs in mitigating adverse impact to safeguard their interests, particularly during this difficult time. These measures would include favorable access to finance, digital tools, and capacity building initiatives that would ensure their continued participation in regional and global value chains. The summit also emphasized that ASEAN must also look beyond immediate crisis management and see this as an opportunity to advance a forward-looking resilient strategy, particularly through the diversification of trade, investment, capital, digital transformation, as well as the advancement of sustainable development. So in other words, it's not just a challenge, but of course also an opportunity, how we can diversify, how we can accelerate what we have. The leaders look forward to an enhanced partnership. I see I want to emphasize the work with ADB, partnership with ADB to support the implementation of the ASEAN Community Vision 2045, and welcomes the pledge to allocate $30 billion by 2030 to support ASEAN's priorities, including possible response measures to the crisis, as well as reinforcing long-term resilience of the region. So I think it's good to, because ADB has its headquarters in Manila, and there's been a lot of discussion prior to the 40 ASEAN Summit. So with the participation of the ADB president and his team, as invited by the chair, as a guest chair. So this pledge is something that ASEAN welcome. In this connection, ASEAN must continue leveraging ASEAN economic agreements, including through effective implementation of existing and upgraded ASEAN +1 free trade agreements, maximizing the utilization of the regional comprehensive economic partnership agreements, and the timely conclusion and signing of the ASEAN Digital Framework Agreement within this year. In short, the leaders have reminded me that not to let the crisis to go to waste. So here, what I'm trying to want to emphasize is that there is an urgency to use what we have. We have 7 bilateral FTAs at the moment, and we should maximize the use of these bilateral FTAs, as well as the RCEP agreement that has been placed. And of course, the negotiations for the DEFA that started since September 2023 need to be accelerated and get it done. And it is planned to sign by November at the 49th ASEAN Summit within this year. The third issue that I just mentioned earlier referred to the three priorities of the leaders' discussion, and that is the safety of the ASEAN nationals, which is, there's a lot of discussions on how to protect the ASEAN nationals, particularly those who are still based in the Middle East, particularly in the Gulf states. The leaders, of course, extend their respective countries ready to extend their support to each other's nationals who are in distress or affected by the conflict in the Middle East. So it's clear that there is a way looking at what can be done, particularly under the framework agreements that we have under what we call the Council Assistance. And of course, also the repatriation, as some of the ASEAN member states would send their aircraft, in the case of Singapore, for example. Following that discussion, ASEAN leaders adopted the ASEAN leaders' statement on the response to the Middle East crisis, where they outlined collective responses to strengthen ASEAN's resilience against external shocks. These measures include enhancing crisis coordination, energy security, food security, financial stability, and the supply chain resilience. The leaders highlighted the importance of a whole of ASEAN approach involving political security, economic, and social cultural cooperation, while reaffirming ASEAN's commitment to international law, ASEAN's centrality, and the rule-based regional order, anchor on the fundamental principles of ASEAN. I think particularly we talk about here dialogue and consultation, consensus, and regional cooperation. So in short, the implications of the conflict in the Middle East can be summed up in what I refer to as 5 Fs: fuel, food, fertilizer, finance, and of course, foreign workers or our workers that work in the Middle East. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, let me move on to another issue that was discussed also during the summit, and that is on Timor-Leste. At the 47th ASEAN Summit, leaders signed the declaration on the admission of Timor-Leste into ASEAN, making Timor-Leste officially become the 11th member state of ASEAN. But this time during the 48th ASEAN Summit, the leaders adopted the Cebu Protocol to amend the Charter of the Association of South Asian Nations, or ASEAN. This would be the first time that ASEAN will amend the Charter, since the Charter was adopted in 2007 and ratified in 2008. So for all this year, the Charter has never been amended. And this is the first time that the leaders decided the amendment is necessary in order to allow Timor-Leste to become a full member. In the words of the chair, and here's a quote, "An important milestone not only for Timor-Leste's full integration to ASEAN, but also ASEAN's continuing evolution as a stronger and more inclusive regional community," end quote. So this is why the Charter is being amended in order to accommodate them. The ASEAN leaders, of course, also express their appreciation to Timor-Leste's intention to chair ASEAN in 2029. With the current integration of Timor-Leste for gaining momentum, the leaders reaffirmed their commitment to support Timor-Leste in meeting its requirements for full membership of ASEAN, particularly through the sustained capacity building initiatives. Let me move on to the issue of maritime cooperation, which of course you probably have read a little bit about this. Promoting and foreign maritime cooperation was a key agenda during the 40th ASEAN Summit, with the adoption of the ASEAN Leaders Declaration on Maritime Cooperation. Through this declaration, the leaders reaffirmed their shared commitment to peace, stability, maritime security, and the peaceful resolution of disputes in accordance with international law, specifically the 1982 UNCLOS, which, based on this declaration, is the central legal framework governing all activities, particularly to oceans and seas. As you know, Your Excellency, now all ASEAN member states are parties to the convention, the UNCLOS 1982, all ASEAN member states. The leaders stressed the importance of maintaining freedom of navigation, maritime safety, secure global energy supply chains, and resilient trade routes, while also recognizing the growing challenges posed by marine pollution, biodiversity loss, sea level rise, and threat to critical underwater infrastructure, such as submarine cables and pipelines. With the increasing complexity of maritime issues, what is required is stronger regional cooperation and collaboration across areas such as maritime law enforcement, search and rescue, environmental protection, sustainable shipping, blue economy development, marine scientific research, and combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. ASEAN also reaffirmed support for ongoing efforts to fully implement the Declaration on Conduct Parties in South China Sea, or DOC, and to conclude an effective and substantive code of conduct, COC, in accordance with international law. Of course, there's a lot of question whether we were able to finish with this year. I think there is a commitment to finish with this year during Philippine Chairmanship. This is my understanding based on the discussions, based on what we have heard. And some might question on this issue, are we making real progress or no progress at all? But I can share with you that this year we have increased the number of meetings, the frequency meeting. We meet every month, every month, as compared to before. And at the same time, there are what we have is we maintain momentum, and there's commitment to finish the negotiation in this year. The ASEAN leaders call for strong collaboration through ASEAN-led mechanisms, such as the ASEAN Regional Forum, the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting, plus the ASEAN Maritime Forum and the expanded ASEAN Maritime Forum. They emphasize, here again, and I quote here, they emphasize the continued relevance of the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum as a platform for dialogue and practical cooperation, and noted the ongoing efforts of the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum member agencies to finalize the forum's terms of reference and the concept paper, with the end in view of establishing the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum as an ASEAN secretarial body. So this is an expression, the call on by the leaders that ASEAN will have to work on this. This is, I would say, one of the key issues that have been discussed extensively, negotiated extensively, and we're making some progress there. And of course, with the commitment from the leaders now, this work will have to be negotiated and sort of by member state at the appropriate levels. The ASEAN leaders also noted the planned establishment of the ASEAN Maritime Center in the Philippines, which will support the work of ASEAN and ASEAN-led mechanism on maritime-related issues, and will promote cross-sectoral and cross-pillar collaboration among member states. Also, the ASEAN leaders expressed commitment to further undertake practical cooperation, such as through information sharing, joint exercises, capacity building, and maritime domain awareness. So all this has to do with how we would pursue the maritime cooperation within ASEAN and, of course, with our partners. In addition to the implication of the Middle East conflict, an issue that remains high on the agenda of ASEAN is climate change and disaster resilience. So of course, there's a lot of discussion on the 3 priorities that I mentioned, but climate change and disaster resilience are there. Along this line, ASEAN leaders adopted 2 important documents in that regard. First is the ASEAN Declaration on the Empowerment of Youth in Climate Action and Disaster Resilience. And 2, the ASEAN Leaders Statement on ASEAN Convergence on Disaster Response, the ASEAN Strategic Protocol, I should say, for Emergency and Comprehensive Transformation Framework. So these 2 issues remain of great interest to ASEAN. As you see, ladies and gentlemen, let me now move quickly to the retreat session that the leaders spent much more beyond the allotted time. I would say is one of the very first time that the leaders had a very, very frank and candid discussions. And I think particularly toward the end, they did not read the scripts. They had real exchanges. And I think that was the highlight of the 40 ASEAN Summit, that leaders had a very in-depth discussions. Besides the energy security, food security, that all these issues that we discussed during the plenary session, the retreat is zeroed in on basically on Myanmar. Okay. On Myanmar, of course, I'm also on the Cambodia-Thailand border conflict as well. And so there's a lot of discussions also how to accelerate our work. Building on their discussion in the plenary session, the leaders acknowledged that the damage that the conflict in the Middle East has brought forth would not be able to be undone overnight, even if the conflict were to end now. ASEAN must therefore prepare itself to navigate the challenges that have and will come about as a result of the conflict. The word consensus that the leaders have among themselves, and that the strength of ASEAN lies in its unity and solidarity. And of course, as well as the existing tools and mechanisms which ASEAN could effectively use to manage and mitigate the impact of the crisis in the Middle East. At this juncture, I would like to echo the point that made by the ASEAN chair, and that is ASEAN has the capacity to manage disruptions, that ASEAN has all the mechanisms in place, such as APSA, ADIGA 2.0, and ASEAN Power Grid. What is needed now is to ratify APSA, ADIGA 2.0, and of course to operationalize the ASEAN Power Grid as soon as possible. So I think that there is a sense of priority and urgency to accelerate the ratification process of this very important documents that will help ASEAN. So I think there's call, particularly by the chair and member state, to move quickly on the ratification of these key ASEAN documents. Beyond putting the energy security high on the agenda, of course, the leaders basically focus on what we can do practically to help each other during this challenging time. So basically, whatever each member state can help. Some would say they have extra fuel, maybe they can help. Maybe others would have extra rice. So I think this is the real sense of unity there. The ASEAN leaders collectively acknowledge that in dealing with geopolitical challenges, ASEAN unity and solidarity, I want to stress again, are the keys in enabling ASEAN to effectively managing these challenges. Now, let me move on quickly on to the two issues. Of course, on Myanmar, the situation in Myanmar, the leaders had a lot of discussion on the situation in Myanmar, and particularly on how to address the current situation, particularly after the elections and the formation of the new government. The leaders agreed that in general, they will continue with the 5-point consensus. But of course, the leaders look at what practical approach to take. I think this is ongoing discussions. So they tasked the foreign ministers to discuss some of this issue, particularly with Myanmar, I think, and that's why the ASEAN foreign minister will engage with the Myanmar foreign minister. I think at the level of the ASEAN foreign ministers, when they had their discussion, there's a need to have a virtual meeting in order to listen to what is happening, to get the briefing from Myanmar. And then, of course, also for Myanmar side to be able to listen to the views and the concerns of the ASEAN member states as well. So it's not one way, it's going to be always a two-way. And that's why I think it's important for for us to receive the guidance instruction from the leaders, particularly on the situation in Myanmar. But clearly, I think the emphasis is on ensuring that there's no violence. I think the key there, violence, is to ensure there's no violence, to ensure that there's a genuine national reconciliation. Of course, also on the need to ensure that there will be a Myanmar-led process in the work of Myanmar. With regard to the border issue, I think it was also took up during the meeting. Of course, say that leaders, they had their prerogative. They can take up any issue during retreat. So they discuss and they want to see a ceasefire still stay in place, and they express confidence that the border conflict between two member states will be resolved peacefully. Of course, we thank President Marcos Jr. for his leadership by convening a trilateral summit on the sidelines of the 40th ASEAN Summit, which was, I think to some people, as I know, that it was a surprise because that Philippines exercised its leadership quite well, because Philippines now is the chair, and of course also leading the ASEAN observation team, AOT. So I think there's a lot of, I would say, a lot of discussion here, but that this is the confidence the leaders have that between the two ASEAN member states, that they're going to be able to work, and of course they will support the work of the two countries in moving forward. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, on the preceding day to the ASEAN Summit, for the ASEAN Summit, the special Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, East Asia Growth Area, or BIMEGA Summit was held. It was attended by the 4 countries' leaders and the Secretary General of ASEAN, as well as with the president of the ADB and officials from BIMEGA's development partners, namely Australia, China, European Union, Japan, Republic of Korea, attended as observers. The BIMEGA leaders endorsed the BIMEGA Vision 2035, aligned with ASEAN Community Vision 2045, and reaffirmed their commitment to connectivity, inclusive development, and regional integration. They also emphasized strengthening cooperation in key sectors such as energy, food security, tourism, and connectivity, as well as maximizing economic corridors to facilitate trade. I must say that this year it's a very interesting to see that BIMGA Summit was presented with with more in-depth discussion by the leaders chaired by the president, the Philippines President Marcos Jr. But the secretariat of BMWGA was able to lay out the achievements that they made, the priorities that they now plan to pursue, and that how they can work with all partners. The bottom line is to link this to ASEAN 2045, a shared future, along with the strategic plans. And what's important about BMWGA, this is a very important building block of the ASEAN community. So I think this is a very positive reinforcing to what we do in ASEAN. Now, before the ASEAN Summit and this sub-regional summit, the foreign ministers had the meeting in their capacity as ASEAN foreign ministers, as members of the ASEAN Political Security Community Councils, also the Minister of Trade, the Economic Minister in the capacity as members of the ASEAN Economic Community Council, and as members of the ASEAN Coordinating Council. So they had the discussions, and I will not brief you on this because I want to give the highlights only to the ASEAN Summit. Let me stress in closing that the 40th ASEAN Summit this year, what has stood out is the retreat. The retreat, as I said, that it has a new dynamic discussion among leaders of ASEAN. I think this is a new pathway, in my view, how leaders will be engaging each other with frank discussion, but with respect, mutual respect. And the time, of course, was not a factor. The chair was able to allow exceeded quite a bit of time, so I think there was a lot of time for the full discussions. So all leaders spoke very frankly. And also the meeting this time, I think, has a lot of focus on the energy and energy related. I think given the fact that we're now facing the energy crisis. So the chair was able to focus on the regular agenda of the chair of the summit this year, but with emphasis on the priorities of ASEAN, and that is the energy. Also, I think there's a sense of leaders coming together despite the different challenges, despite the fact that we have, of course, Myanmar situation, this border issue between Cambodia and Thailand that is moving forward. All of us, but leaders were there. They had, I think, a very good spirit working together quite well. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for your time, for being here. And I will be happy to take up any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, SG Dr. Kao, for the very comprehensive briefing. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed with the Q&A session. For those present at the ASEAN Hall, please kindly raise your hand if you wish to ask a question. A member of our team will direct you to the closest standing microphone. For the online participants, please submit your question through the chat feature in the Zoom platform. Kindly state your name, institution, and the question briefly. We will take the first round of questions from the floor, please. Yes.
Greetings, my name is Nada from the Jakarta Globe. So you mentioned that the APSA security agreement will be ratified as soon as possible, but can you give us a timeline, a specific timeline on when will this ratification take place? And also regarding the fuel sharing mechanism, which ASEAN country will be the first one to get the emergency fuel? Thank you.
That's a good question. Thank you. Time frame, I think ministers now, they have clear instruction from the leaders that this is not a guidance, instruction from leaders that APSA must be expedited. by all ASEAN member states. So each member state will have to go back to their respective parliaments and to get this cleared domestically as quickly as possible. So I cannot give you a time frame, but of course, I'm sure that it should be done within, there's no doubt will be before the 49th ASEAN Summit. Okay, and I hope very much. Now, in terms of field sharing, of course, this is will have to be sorted out by the respective member state that we have to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, SG Dr. Kao. May we move to the second question, please?
Good morning, Mr. Secretary General. My name is Danny from the Japanese newspaper, the Yomiuri Shimbun. Was the preparation ahead of the 35th anniversary ASEAN-Russia Summit discussed at the summit in Cebu? What will be the main agenda of the upcoming ASEAN-Russia Summit in Kazan in June? Will strengthening the energy cooperation be one of the main topics of discussion? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. The substance, the preparation was discussed by more senior officials. They had their meeting earlier in Kazan. And there's some discussion at the ministerial level, but the leaders level, they did not go into very much in the detail. The upcoming ASEAN-Russia Commemorative Summit is to commemorate the 35th anniversary of the relationship between the two sides. Of course, energy is one of the areas that will be discussed during the summit, and of course to be expected so, but of course based on the current preparation is one of the issues. Of course will be one of the documents should be as the outcome document as well. But I would say that all leaders, I think more or less, I don't see anyone say no yet, but I heard that, I mean, that they will be there. But again, until the end, until the day of the summit. But it was discussed that energy issue, but there are other issues, particularly on the main cooperation, how to move the cooperation forward between the two sides, because this is the 35th anniversary. So it's not just a discussion on one particular issue. There will be a wide range of issues between the two sides. And that's why in preparations for the upcoming summit, we had the senior official meeting between us and Russia already. And the minister discussed a little bit during the meetings in Cebu. As you know, that this is on our side, we will work closely with the chair, and in particular work with the country coordinator. And of course, this is on the ASEAN side, but on the Russia side, we have to work very closely through the various mechanisms that we have, including the mission of Russian Federation to ASEAN here in Jakarta, and of course, through the different channels that we have. So I want to say, yes, coming back, energy security is one of the key issues that will be on the agenda.
Thank you, SG Dr. Kao. May we open the floor for another question? Yes, please.
Yes, Ambassador. That's true, yes.
One question. This year,
Maybe, sorry, you have to take the mic because of virtual online. So colleagues from online can hear you as well. Thank you.
thank you, Excellency. Thank you for the very comprehensive briefing. As we are all aware that this year we are celebrating 50 years of the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. Whether our leaders provided us with guidance on how to make the TAC more effective in the future. Thank you, Excellency.
You talk about TAC, right? Yes. Well, I think the general discussions, but not specific leaders, do not go into the details of this nature. But it's clear that leaders are very much looking forward to the commemoration. But this will be taking place in July during AMM. And the Philippines, as chair of ASEAN, has been preparing for this already, for the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the TSC. And I understand that the invitation is sent now already, because I have received one. And it will be a very milestone achievement for ASEAN. I think it's good that Philippines has prepared this way well in advance. And I'm sure that the leaders will have more discussion at the 49th ASEAN Summit. But in general, there's references to this important milestone achievement of ASEAN and the need for us to respect what's in the TSC. I think the fundamental principle in the TSC is there. So at the same time, I want to take this opportunity to inform that we will have some countries that will be exceeding the TSC as well during the sideline of the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of TSC. So we're looking at, I think, around 6 countries that will be exceeding, in addition to what we have now, 58 high contracting parties. So the number keeps increasing. We have more countries that have requested, and we are going through the process of review as it will be undertaken by the member states with the support of the Asean secretariat. So the July 24th, which is the date of the commemoration, would be, I think, will be under the leadership of Her Excellency Teresa Lazaro, who is the chair of AVAM. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, SG Dr. Kao. May we open the floor for the final question, please? Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Secretary General. I'm Stanley. I'm from Reuters. I have a question on the South China Sea. The phrasing effective and substantive code of conduct, does that mean that ASEAN and China are abandoning a legally binding code of conduct because of the phrasing in the statement? And also, have the goalposts changed in terms of timeline, because there's a specific mention that the negotiations will be concluded this year, although you're optimistic that it will be, but did the leaders agree to any timeline, any sort of timeline? Thanks.
Well, first of all, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, because the teams from the ASEAN side and from China are still negotiating. And there are a number of issues that are still ongoing. So that's number one. In terms of the timeline, we agreed back in 2023 here in Jakarta that we should conclude the COC negotiation within a period of 3 years, so within 2026. And I say I have a lot of confidence, a lot of optimism to have the COC concluded within this year. It's because there are 3 reasons for me personally here. Number one, because we now have a fixed monthly meeting. You know, we have a monthly meeting basically to pursue the negotiations. Second, we are now maintaining the momentum. So we're making concrete progress. Those who are not there, you don't know what it is. Even me, I'm not there personally, but I got briefings constantly. And I would ask also the questions to make sure that I have a full understanding. So the timeline is still here. We have not moved any goalposts at all. The commitment still there on both sides to conclude it within this year. So that's why I say it's still here with us. This is still May, and they meet every month. So as someone who used to serve on the Highlight Task Force on Drafting ASEAN Charter, that time the instruction from the leaders, we have only 10 months to get the charter in place. That was instruction. So all of us had to lock ourselves in the room, even after midnight, we have to continue on. With the effective co-chairmanship from the Philippines and of course Singapore, we get it done. Of course, also, we had timelines as in terms of what we had to negotiate. The same thing I would say now that because we have the dates lining up every meeting every month. So this is basically, in my view, a follower similar to what we used to do, that as long as we have meeting every month, I think there is a review of the progress, and then they will take up the new agenda of every negotiation. So I think this is something that will take place. I remain very optimistic that the CAC negotiation will be concluded with this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, SG Dr. Kao, for the very comprehensive briefing. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of today's briefing. Thank you for your participation and have a good day.